Welcome to Iteration Office Hours. Appreciate you showing up. And Jackie has the first question and the second one. Thanks for that, Jackie. You want to verbalize?
You bet. Thanks, Sid. So I recently saw the addition of 12 things that are not iterating, which I felt were really great examples of how to avoid iterating incorrectly. But I wanted you to describe a little bit of the motivation behind this list and how it originated.
Yeah, thanks for that. I think iteration is very unintuitive, and that's why we spend the most time on that as we talk about our values. And I've seen people refer to things that felt to them like iteration, but were not. And that causes all kinds of problems. Like, it seems that they're acting according to our values, but they're not. It seems that we're doing the right thing, but we were not. And it wasn't their intention, but it led to adverse outcomes, and it kind of diluted iteration. So I thought, hey, let's describe what is not iteration to make sure that when we use the word, it's used for what we intend it to do.
That's super helpful. Thank you for giving that context.
Thanks for asking.
My second iteration issue is around the verify stage. We've been working on a security feature called enable secure workflows using CI job token. And during the rollout of this feature, we've received some feedback from users that this change interrupted their workflow and actually started to represent what we would describe as a breaking change, because they are using CI job tokens in non-typical or abnormal ways. So we resulted to a rollout path that did not enable it by default on GitLab, and they have to go in and opt into the feature. We do have a critical path to enable it by default by 15.0 because of the breaking changes thing. But I wanted to ask you, how do you think about iteration when there's so many potential unknown edge cases due to the flexibility of GitLab? And how do we think about that and cope with it?
Yeah, I love the case. Thanks for that. Probably, I assume we're doing the right thing. Like, if it's a breaking change for people, we should probably wait until a major release before we introduce that. But I did want to hear a little bit on making sure I understand what's happening. So I read the issue, and I think we do a CI job token is already temporarily. So it expires after a certain time, but now we also want to make it project specific. But there are some people using it to power bots, or their bots use it and they access multiple projects. So it cannot be, if we make a project specific, it might not work for their use case. Is that how I should interpret it?
Yes, that is definitely one case that people were getting failing pipelines or packages weren't pulling from the registry because they've been using these CI job tokens to work in other projects without adding them to that project permission. And now they have to manually go in and add it to that project permission in order for it to go green. But there's also some cases where they're using CI job token to spawn different projects or to bump a version. And those edge cases weren't necessarily accounted for in this research because we didn't think that CI job token could be used in those ways. And that is what's breaking. That's why it's considered a breaking change now.
Yeah, makes sense to me. If it's a temporary token already, did the bot just request the CI job token?
Yes, it can. Some people have scripts that allow the CI job token to be enacted whenever they conduct an activity inside of another project.
So the bot is requesting kind of a fresh token every so often.
Right.
How in a non-bot situation, in our normal situation, how is the token requested?
It's usually added to the project as like an environment variable and then scoped in specific jobs and pipelines.
But what triggers the generation of it?
Oh, the user, like the user conducting an action, they have the permissions to use that.
And can we make it so that new CI job tokens are created with a scope and existing ones are not? Existing ones have a broader scope?
That's a good question. Let me think about that a second. So in the current implementation, we have the project adding that CI job token scope to it. So the project allows that access from the CI job token. But you're saying to kind of reverse that and to have this live on the CI job token?
We might be talking past each other, and that's probably
Okay.
because I don't completely understand, but I understand the problem is like, hey, we want the CI job token scoped to certain projects, but we cannot do that for existing ones because of bots. And my question is, can we do it for all new job tokens? Because when someone creates a new one, we can say, hey, this is scoped to only this or that, not to all your projects.
Yeah. I think we need to investigate that option. Today, we're only looking at the project because that's where the CI job token behaves, is in the project. It's not like a separate entity, but we could investigate like new CI job tokens getting access to projects. Currently, the rollout has projects that were created after a certain date, 14.1, get this new setting. And that's when we notice that people are spawning new projects with these CI job tokens. And that's when their workflow would break down.
Yep. So I'm not sure it's a solution. I'm not sure I'm understanding everything correctly, but the advice would be, instead of kind of changing a setting in GitLab where like now the job tokens have more limited scope, you just generate all new CI job tokens with a limited scope by default, and people can give it a wider scope, but it would have to be intentionally. And you remove that option in 15.0 or something like that.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you for that.
Thanks. Not sure it's a good idea, but thanks for working through it. Anoop has 3 things on the agenda. Thanks for that, Anoop. Really appreciate it.
Absolutely. So thank you for recording the 12 things that are not iterating. I notice a lot of our examples end up focusing on R&D and the art of actually developing products. What are your thoughts about iteration and product strategy, GTM, sales planning, or other functions like NTAPs when they have to do software selections? And I've listed an example, but I'm not going to verbalize it because it might be not good for public consumption.
Yep. I think since it's a project name, I think we can mention it, but out of an abundance of caution, I won't either. So iteration is applicable to the stuff that is like really that's a lot of work. So you want to make sure that when you make that as small as possible and you get feedback. If something is not a lot of work, like walking through like an idea maze, like walking through a planning, do that. Like it totally saves time. So I think of it as, if you plan to go somewhere, like you have an idea of where approximately that point is, and then along the way you check on your map whether you're walking correctly and you're able to adjust your route. But it's not because you're checking your map every now and then that you just set off from home without even having a vague idea of how long it's going to take, what direction you should walk in, what the weather's going to be. Like iteration is not an alternative to planning. what it means is you plan it and then you cut up, you have all these, you cut the work up in smaller chunks that you ship faster so that you can get feedback on the work. But it's absolutely no substitute for planning. So with the project you have in the agenda, we do that. With a project called Pods, we're trying to do that, walk through that idea maze. We make fiscal year planning. We do a lot of planning in GitLab. Planning is really essential, but it's also something that is like, it's always going to be incorrect. It's always going to be something else. And the idea is to create steps in between to adjust it. So you plan to go to a certain point, but through iteration, you kind of learn that the point has shifted along the route. And maybe that's kind of where my analogy breaks down. But the thing is, you're going to learn stuff while you're walking, and you're going to adjust where you want to go.
Yeah, thank you. Victor, you had a comment.
Yeah, does it mean that while we are planning, we should not think about how we will be able to iterate on it? So whether one can be faster delivered than the other, but we should plan based on the best final outcome that we think about, and then start to break it down into iterations, or?
Yeah, and the shadows that both Anoop and Victor, their question might be worth adding to the 12 things that are not. So iteration is something we want to do, but it doesn't mean, for example, we choose the thing that we can iterate on, or we choose the thing that is shortest. No, we choose the thing that gets us kind of maximum results for minimum effort or input or something like that. Had the biggest bang for the buck. So suppose I have two projects or three projects. One of them, I get $1,000 with a month of work. The other one, I get $100 with a week of work. And the other one, I get 3 times $25 with a day of work. I'm going to do the $1,000 in a month, and then too bad there's no halfway point. Now we should go to the office to the iteration office hours and figure out if there's a halfway point. But like it shouldn't put the cart before the horse. The most important value is results. So we do what gets us the maximum results, considering the effort, which frequently is only doing 20% of the work. But that's a different conversation. For iteration should not influence what we do, but more how we do it.
Thanks.
Thanks for asking.
I think my next question is along the same lines on planning, because in the video you mentioned the importance of planning well. And how should teams think about it with respect to optimizing for velocity or predictability? Because I've often heard us say that, hey, especially when it comes to R&D, we don't really want to spend a lot of time planning. And that means there will be some unpredictability in when things get delivered and unknowns will appear.
Thanks for this question. It's an excellent question. Planning is fine. I think there are things that I've seen, for example, things like planning poker, where you give estimates as a team, that can suck up quite a good amount of time. And the better thing would have been just to slice it into kind of smaller steps. And that would have, talking about how to iterate more would have been a better spend of time than talking about at length, like how long is something going to take. Instead of talking about how long it takes, try to make it smaller, so you learn about how long it takes along the way. Now, that doesn't always apply. Planning in general, fine activity. What we're hesitant to do is create extra slack in the schedule to be more predictable. Suppose you have a bunch of activities, and any activity can take between 1 and 100 days. but you don't know upfront how long it's going to take. And you have, I don't know, 200 days to spend, 200 engineering days or something like that. Like if you want a 100% reliable schedule, you're going to select only 2 activities, because that way you're 100% sure you're going to make the schedule. Well, if you do an average schedule, you're going to say, well, we have 200, an average going to be 50. We're going to schedule about 4 of them. And we've seen every time when we really press on predictability, we slow down by about half. And part of that is kind of work expands to fill the time allotted to it and kind of go over it. And we've seen that effect. So kind of stuffing the schedule a bit too full kind of forces you to kind of to keep the work small and get it out. So we were about 70% predictable in engineering. And then we said, okay, we want to get higher, want to get to 90% predictability. We ended up scheduling half the work, and we got half the work. Of that half the work, we got 70% done again. So like it didn't include, we created extra slack, and it didn't even improve the predictability, which was really counterintuitive. We didn't expect that result. Did you think about the analogy? Maybe the important lesson is that how long something takes is flexible, and it also depends on how much time you have for it, which is something I didn't appreciate as much. And it wasn't about working longer hours or things like that. It was just the work expanding somehow. There was a lot. Does that resonate?
Yeah, thanks for clarifying that. That helps a lot. In the video, I had another one, which is advice around building reusable components. And the context here is you mentioned how every iteration should have some end value to a customer. And I'm not well versed with the history of how we decided that epics and issues are different objects. So I'm speculating here that maybe we wanted a quick valuable epic out to test. And then once we did that, these objects continue to stay separate. So first of all, I don't know if that's true. Is it?
Thanks for asking. That's not how it happened. It was a very conscious decision. I thought we should use the same objects. The DRI decided otherwise. My point was, hey, we do epics at the group level, issues at the project level. At some point, people will want issues at the group level and epics at the issue level, and it's going to become a big mess. And the decision was, we'll deal with it at that time. We don't want to overload issues. Now, in hindsight, it was the wrong decision. I might have overridden the DRI because I felt it pretty strongly. But I was also hesitant because I had a history in my own programming of overloading concepts, like calling everything a content container and things like that, and making stuff really ugly. So I was like, I have this habit of not splitting objects enough in my Ruby code. So I have a bias. So I wasn't sure I could trust myself, and I didn't push for the decision. And you live, you learn. It took a whole lot of time before we even re-implemented all the issue features for epics. And in hindsight, that was we could have done it way more efficiently, but it wasn't caused by iteration.
Okay, thanks for clarifying.
Could be caused by iteration, though. It's a valid scenario and one we should avoid.
Can I? As I have the next topic. This is related to Anup's previous question around the planning. As you gave the answer, I realized that we can speak about planning in many ways. One is that we want amazing predictability, And the other is that we want to understand the scope of work, and that enables splitting it up into multiple deliverables and actually enables iterating faster. And as all this idea just occurred to me, I don't have a very specific question except of how would you find the balance between that? I mean, I don't speak about predictability. I really speak about some understanding of the work so we can break it down.
Yeah. Great conversation points. Thanks for the opportunity. And the 3 S's are very legitimate use cases. I just made up the 3 S's on the spot here, but selecting what work you're going to do and selecting the biggest bang for the buck project, scoping the work, like what's the minimal we can do, and then splitting it up into smaller parts. Very good, great use of planning. Kind of with planning, we mean like scheduling less work so we're more predictable. We have bad experience with that. And so I think in on product management, kind of order of criteria, it's like, yeah, we don't mind predictability, but it's like the last thing we'll look at. To what extent does that address your question?
Yeah. Thanks.
Thanks. That was the last question in the doc. Anyone want to verbalize?